everyone. It's 2:07. We're going to go ahead and start the meeting. I am Jennifer Bentley. I'm the president of the Newtonville Area Council. We have
Raina Getz. I'm the president of the Woburn Area Council.
I'm the president of the town. So we also have two counselors here today. We have Tariq Lucas from Ward 2 and Pam Wright from Ward 3. And this meeting is being video recorded and audio recorded. Just watch your language.
And I would like to mention that we have two area counselors from my area council, Chris Pitts and Isabel Albeck and Drake McCabe in attendance.
We also have Martina Jackson from Newtonville Area Council.
Robert Fizek here.
Yep.
Robert, and also we have Jeremy, Frederick, myself, we have Bruce, Gregory in the room.
Okay, yep.
So great. Well, thank you all for being here. I know it's tough on a nice Saturday afternoon to all be either on your computer or in the library. But we decided to host a joint community meeting for the 4 area councils. We pulled it together so that we could talk about zoning and the process of what the city council and plan department are doing currently. And we'll get into that a little more in the end, but we wanted to do kind of a zoning introduction and go through all of the terms and things you're going to see when you do get to the survey process, which we're going to talk about. Just so everyone knows exactly what they are voting for when they do go through the survey. So it's more of an informational meeting to keep everyone informed of zoning and what's going on. So I'm going to turn it over to Anil, and you're going to start.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi again, everyone. So why are we here today? So the city of Newton is updating certain aspects of the zoning ordinance. Zoning ordinance regulates land use and kinds of things.
Can you please speak louder?
So
Get closer to your mic.
it's land use and certain what can be built and where it can be built, and even more granular things like architectural design, building height, etc.
We can't hear him. Just hold on to it.
Is this better?
No,
Sound better? It is.
Try again.
Can you hear me now, everyone?
Robert, can you hear? Robert, can you?
Not as well as everyone else.
All right. So what about, who else is online? Diane, can you hear?
It's very hard to hear. Is he holding the microphone all the way up to his lips?
Yeah, I can't hear.
Okay,
Are you able to hear?
let's figure this out. Oh, God.
And speak a little louder into the.
Wait, let me do
air.
this.
Wait a minute.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
No, I can hear.
Or is there a volume control on the equipment?
Settings. maybe?
Yes, settings. Hang on, we're checking the audio.
we can hear you talking. It's just not loud enough to understand the words.
Can you hear me talking right now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
very clear. Because it's
Fine. Rena's fine.
change microphone. Go in
How do you do?
here.
You do it. You do.
Click on that.
What?
Click on it. There we go. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but that's fine. Don't worry.
Is that good? Can you?
No, I just assume go up there where I can clean at the same time. I'm getting a lot of static. Is anyone else getting that?
Yeah, that's all I hear.
Yes.
That's different. I'm not hearing anything. I don't know what's happening.
Same here.
Is that Peter?
Yep. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
online.
Okay, we're gonna move the microphone, so just bear with us for a second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that would be the fix, bringing us to flip around so that there's talking. Testing one, I don't see the blue thing. There it is. Whoa. Turn that off. Testing. Okay, can you hear us now?
We
Is
can
that
hear.
better?
Yes.
Pay for something.
Oh,
No.
hang on.
How about now?
Now have them say something.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, that's good.
That's good? Ta-da.
Bob Burke, nod your head yes if you can hear.
Speak loud.
Okay, we're
Yeah,
good.
you're gonna have to do the thing, yeah. You can sit down and do it if you want.
Thank
Can you
you.
hear me now? Is this better for everyone?
Much better.
Okay.
Things have fallen apart since I left.
Bob, we need you back here. That's really. People in the room, pardon me for sitting.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
Okay, let's just start over. So again, the city of Newton is updating certain aspects of its zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance is a set of rules that regulates land use, tells you what can be built and where. The Newton City Council is currently considering a set of proposed zoning changes for Newton's Village Center commercial districts. And then before we dive into that, I just wanted to make one mention of feedback tool. The purpose of today's meeting obviously is to discuss some of these updates and what is being proposed, but it's also meant to get everybody thinking about how they feel about these changes. And because the city wants to hear from you, and it wants to hear what you think about these updates. And the way to do that is through this feedback tool, which is a survey tool that'll be available on your computer. You can fill it out on your computer or on your phone as well. We'll talk about that more at the end of the presentation. Let's skip 2 slides. Okay. So before we begin, to help kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about later, we just want to give a brief rundown of Newton zoning history. Today's village centers have developed through a complex interplay of economic shifts, transportation initiatives, and ever-changing trends in household lifestyles for nearly 400 years. Much of Newton's village centers were developed before the first zoning ordinance in 1922, and also before even World War II. Transportation options like railroads, streetcars, buses, and automobiles have strongly shaped both the location, development, and redevelopment of Newton's village centers. And so what you see on the screen right now is obviously Newton, and the asterisks are various village centers. And the asterisks have different color codes, sort of indicating sort of what transportation technological features helped in their development. Like, for example, Newton Lower Falls and Newton Upper Falls are located along the Charles River, and those helped foster the growth of mills and factories because they use the Charles River to power those buildings, and that sort of helped the development of Newton Upper Falls and Newton Lower Falls. Other technologies such as the train, as railroads developed in the 1800s, There was a rail line between Newton and Boston that was established and then helped villages such as Waubun or West Newton or Auburndale develop commercially and residentially as people began to rely on those means of transportation. Okay. So this is a map of Newton in 1921. In 1922, Newton adopted its first zoning ordinance. Interestingly, this came 6 years after New York City became the first municipality to adopt its own comprehensive municipal zoning ordinance. So we were an early adopter toward this feature of land use regulation. The early zoning ordinance was designed to essentially keep commercial and industrial uses where they were at the present time, back in 1922. And you'll see here the map, at the bottom of the map, there's listing different districts that showed how land use, how building approvals would be regulated. So you have single residence, general residence, which I think means apartments, business, commercial, and industrial uses. Okay, next slide, please. So from when Newton's first zoning ordinance was adopted in 1922 through about 1950, Newton's population nearly doubled from 46,000 to 82,000 people. This rapid growth led to two major zoning overhauls. One, though this says 1931, was in 1940, and the second was in 1953. The latter relied in part on a lot of post-World War II suburban ideal. And by that, one example of that is sort of it aimed to reduce the density of residential properties. And then the map here shows, the pink shows all existing buildings that were built before 1945. So it shows that there's a lot of older building stock in the city. Next slide. And this is a zoning map from 1938. Shows how zoning was approached in that year. So there are 6 zoning districts. And so those in each of those zoning districts, it tells you what can be built or redeveloped, what's allowed to be built. So the categories, are similar to what I had mentioned before. This one thing I wanted to point out was business, which is in brown. It may be hard to see, but as you see, some areas along the top and along the side and in the center are zoned for business. And these seem to match village centers, the location of village centers. And most of the village centers today also sit within business districts. And there's 2 types of them. Okay. And now we're going to speed up our time machine to head into the 21st century, talk about more recent zoning reform efforts. So the last major update to commercial center zoning was back in 1987, so 35 years ago. Since 2000, the city of Newton has produced multiple future-looking plans and reports that all have highlighted the need to change zoning in village centers in order to achieve stated goals. So in 2007, there was the 2007 comprehensive plan, which highlighted how the zoning ordinance was difficult to read and did not always lead to desirable outcomes. As a result, city staff, city council, and community members formed the zoning reform group in 2011. This group recommended comprehensively updating the zoning ordinance, and this kicked off the zoning redesign projects. In 2015, the zoning ordinance was reorganized to make it more user-friendly. And in 2016, the city began to develop the pattern book to assess existing development patterns in order to better understand Newton's context. So geographic data, historical records, policy documents, community input, and existing condition measurements were all used to sort of inform the drafting of the pattern book. And this was released in 2018. And the pattern book is available on the city website. So it's got a lot of interesting reading, actually. Next slide. Okay. So in 2021, last year, the city shifted its focus on zoning districts and village centers. And this was a 3-phase approach. Phase 1, which took place in summer of 2021, involved identifying values. And this involved the planning department reaching out to different communities in Newton to gauge how they, what their future vision was for village centers. And in that process, several sort of values or several priorities were identified. And they are as follows: to create more communal and public space, to increase accessibility to buildings and infrastructure within village centers, to incorporate climate resiliency through green space and other means, to help small businesses begin, stay, and thrive in village centers, to make the permitting process easier and clearer, among other things, to add more diverse housing options and encourage mixed-use projects, to prioritize safe and accessible routes, especially for walking and biking, and then to incentivize the preservation and adaptive reuse of historic buildings. So phase 2 is where we are today. And what we are, this phase involves looking at the zoning update proposals that the city staff has drafted based upon the values that were identified in phase 1. And in addition, the zoning and planning committee of the city council also evaluated this and came up with these proposed updates. And these were resulting proposals we're going to be talking about in this meeting. The next step will be phase 3, which will take place, is scheduled to take place in the winter of 2022. Based upon the input that the community provides on these updates, a zoning ordinance language will be drafted, and that will then be considered by the zoning and planning committee. They'll vote on whether to approve or this language, and if they approve it, it will be passed on to the full city council to vote on that. And if the full city council approves that, then that new zoning language will become part of the zoning regulations and be what needs to be followed going forward. So that is sort of an introductory, just to set the stage for what we're going to talk about next. And I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Raina Getz.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? I hope online you can hear me. So the first step I wanted to do was to present some zoning terminology so that everybody is sort of on the same page in terms of what I say, so that then it's not a question. And we are going to, post all of this information so that you can go back and refresh and reinterpret or understand what's being presented. Let me also just say that all of my content comes from city planning department documents and everything that's available through the planning department in terms of the virtual exhibit, as well as what was up in the library. And if there are any concerns or questions, you could reach out to me. So the first piece is defining terms that for building size and massing. The building footprint is defined as the total gross floor area of a building, including all enclosed spaces, or it's otherwise known as the portion of the building that touches the ground. The maximum building footprint limit is the upper limit of the gross total, the total gross floor area of a building. A building height is defined as the vertical distance between the elevations of the average grade plane and the highest point on the roof. A setback is defined as a line equidistant from the lot line, which establishes the nearest point to the lot line at which the nearest point of the principal building may be erected. As of right is defined as development that may proceed under a zoning ordinance or bylaw without the need for a special permit, variance, zoning amendment, waiver, or any other discretionary zoning approval. And a lot is an area of land which defines boundaries that is used or available for use as the site of a building or buildings. And that actually comes from DHCD definition in the final guidelines. Okay, another term that's really good to know is floor area ratio. It's the ratio of all building gross floor area divided by the lot area. It's a metric for regulating the number of square feet that can be developed on a parcel without specifying the exact shape or size of the structure. So in the example that I'm presenting here below, it's an example of a FAR of 2. And that this means that a building can be twice as much in gross floor area as lot area. And you can see, I really like this diagram because what it's doing, it's showing that this is almost like a form that you can either have it long and wide, square, or tall and vertical. so it's an interpretation of what you can do with the building massing, but it can take many different forms. The gross floor area is the total square feet of all of the floor areas in a building plus other floor area that are designated to count towards the total. So it's well defined in our ordinance, and it's very specific about what does and doesn't count. The development standards, which we will talk about, determine the overall size, shape, and location of a building or buildings that a property owner can develop on their lot. These standards form the nuts and bolts of any zoning code. And it's meant to promote positive outcomes for the community. And our zoning ordinance is right now under consideration to incorporate these new standards. They are rules, they're actually our land use laws, and they actually affect all projects in any zoning district in very much the same way. They will regulate the overall building height and mass, but it does not regulate architectural style. It basically creates a framework with specific constraints that design and creative process must work within. So what I would like to do is sort of like cluster each of the proposed zoning framework proposals. So I'll first discuss building design. I'll move on to lot configuration, the review process, and then I'll end with parking. Okay, so the first thing that was considered was the getting to an overall industrial standard for floor-to-floor heights for residential as well as commercial uses. So currently in your BU1 and your BU2 districts, it's a 12-foot floor-to-floor height. And what's being proposed is, I thought it was 11, but in the document, yeah, it's here. And in all the documents, it's saying it's 12. But, in the zoning and planning committee, it was 11. So we'll figure that out later. For commercial, it's 13 feet. And for commercial on the ground floor, it's 18 feet. Okay, and you can see what this looks like. In terms of our current, we have 12-foot equa between each of the floors, and what's being proposed is 18 feet on the commercial ground floor. And it's also being proposed that, we'll move on to understanding that the reason that it's 18 feet is because many businesses and many, restaurants, bookstores require taller ceilings to function properly. There's a equipment need, like exhaust systems and other mechanical equipment that needs to be housed up above. So that's the ask for the change. The next piece that was one of the framework proposals was to incentivize varied roof lines with a half story. They're suggesting that currently in Newton, we have a lot of flat structures, and this is due to the whole numbers of either being allowed to create 2 floors or 3 floors. So now they're proposing the max height as a half story. So it could actually be 2.5 to up to 4.5, but it apparently will allow additional flexibility, and it also will allow for a setback. And this picture actually does a better job of describing it, so that you can see this used to be 10, now it's 7 as the setback, and these are all the parameters for a half story, if you have a flat roof or if it's pitched. And this is what it looks like for the BU3 example. It is saying that the step back is a requirement for, and Pam, you can always, oh, please change. Sorry. All right, so you can see this is the BU3 example with the first 3 stories at 38 feet and then an additional half story, taking it up to, looks like 50 on this diagram. Does it see? Yeah, so it's 3.5 stories. And they're saying that it allows for, diminishing the building massing by pulling it in. And it's also saying that it allows for more light, air to the street, and it creates a usable terrace space up on the roof. So this is what's being proposed to increase the height proportional to the village center size. So and this is a bar chart with what is being proposed. So it shows you that currently the orange is in BU2 and BU1, that by right you can have 2 stories, but with special permit you can go up to 4. I wish I had a pointer. All right, so, but what's being proposed is this for the BU2 revised district, it's going up to 2.5 by right, and it's going up to 4 stories by special permit. Now, in a medium village center, you can have both. You can have the BU2 and the BU3, and the new residential district will allow a by right structure at 3.5 stories high. And then lastly, the MU4 will allow the BU2, the BU3, and the MU4. And you can see that the allowable by right height, story height is 4.5. And then by special permit, it can go up to 6 feet. Right?
6 stories, not.
Oh, sorry. Thank
6
you.
feet, 6
And
feet,
I
6 feet
want
would be
input.
wonderful.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, Pam Bright is right here, right next to me. And if I say something that comes out of my mouth that doesn't sound right, please interrupt. She's on the zoning and planning committee. All right, just so everybody.
You might also want to talk about which village centers are coming in.
It's coming. All right, so the proposal is to create 3 new village districts, zoning districts, which will establish a zoning framework that allows for small, medium, and large scale development appropriate for the size and attributes of each of the village centers. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of them specifically, but you can see when I talked about FAR, allowable, and know now that the BU2 and the BU1 has an allowable by right FAR of 1.5. So the smallest ones with the BU2 revised zoning district, it's currently, and this is, from the city's planning department documents, it's designating 4 corners, Newton Upper Falls and Newton Lower Falls. And this is what it looks like in terms of the schematics that are coming out of the documents. And you can see the by right development is 2.5 stories. Here we go with the building footprint being identified, a maximum building footprint as 5,000 square feet. And to understand a little bit of this, we have not been given any other dimensional controls like setbacks. This is a maximum. So what's going to create what's going on with the building, and in terms of its building footprint would be other dimensional controls like setbacks and also open space requirements. Those haven't been identified yet, so we are kind of like in a suspended state about those. Okay, and here are some images that they presented in terms of by rights. And here we have our strong block, which is an old 2.5 stories. What's wrong? You can't see anything? Okay. Here's the BU3 revised, and we have a new residential district right here in the darker turquoise with additional FAR heights of 2 and 1.75. And the villages that have been identified to have both the the revised BU2 and the BU3 would be Nonanton, Highlands, Auburndale, Waban, and Thompsonville.
Just ask a question.
No, can we hold no, can we hold the questions till the end, please? No.
That's right, good question for clarity.
Okay,
And we can look at the city council here. Are the maps of where they're actually proposing this available? Because I just did a survey this week and they're asking, I think, citizens where we think this should be.
So
I'm a little confused by what you said.
So they
Just repeat this question. so they can hear it.
Okay. So I think that, do you want to restate your question, Mr. Powdermaker?
Yeah, so this is Dan Powdermaker.
Yeah.
I was unaware that there actually was information from the city about where they are thinking about making the various villages.
We can't hear him.
It is.
So, there's my question, I'm
Yeah.
repeating it now. The survey that's available to citizens is actually asking us as residents where we think it should be, and I just did it this week, so is this map actually available? Or are we
Yes.
speculating?
Yes, so what you see there, which says tier B, that's a planning, the planning department document.
So when they listed, well, actually, I think it was from our consultant, and when which was approved by our planning department. And when they listed the villages, that was presented back in February or March of this year.
Why are people shaking their head? I've been at all these meetings also. I'm not seeing this.
Sorry. Can I interrupt for a moment here? I just want to tell you that everything that I'm showing is actually from planning department documents. So they were presented at the zoning and planning committee, and this will possibly change. We are being told that as you fill in the survey and present where you would like to put your designations, it's going to inform the process. But we've also been told by the planning department that there's no change to the zoning framework, that only this information, the survey, will then inform the actual drafting of the ordinance. So
also add that for people who are involved in implementation meetings, these villages were identified as their current thinking for what small, medium, and large were. We were kind of surprised that we made it into the exhibit in the library or into the tool, but for those folks who attended those three meetings.
I'm very surprised to hear this because I think my understanding from being into the sitting on this into the document was that the mapping exercise is the next phase.
We can't hear any of this.
They're gonna keep talking and come up. I'm sorry, because they really
Yeah.
can't hear you.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, so this was presented, the small, medium, and large back in the winter or early spring. And the mapping is not complete yet. And they are going to use some of the information they're going to get, and the mapping is going to be coming next. But this is what they designated at the beginning, but it's not set in stone. But this is what they initially started.
Can I just add so that agreeing with them that at the library, there is no mention of which villages or which.
Yeah.
So in the survey, you can say whatever you want, it makes no sense.
But it's not current. It's not in the current.
So why are we spending our time going to the library forever?
Sorry, can we, wait, I appreciate the questions, and I sort of would like to continue, but let's end with Peter Harrington.
It's been 2 weeks since I was to the library. When I went there was a large map on the wall that had drawings of the boundaries of the various villages and described them as small villages, medium villages, and large villages. So I'm sorry that you don't know what is being talked about, but I saw it at the library. I don't know what happened to it.
Okay, let me continue only because I kind of have a lot of content to go through. Sorry. So this is a descriptor right here of what the by right development looks in the planning department documents of 2.5 versus a 3.5, and you can see the orange versus the turquoise colors in terms of their schematics. And then you can also now see that the BU3 revised has a maximum building footprint of 10,000 square feet. And so you have your BU2 and your BU3 by rights. And now in this village, the BU3 will allow, keep going. Sorry. The BU3 will, no, keep back. Sorry. I'm just watching my screen. So this is the correct one. Thanks. So the special permit process would allow a 5-story building. So let's just skip this one and then go to the MU4 revised. The village centers that have been identified preliminarily in the zoning and planning committee meeting was Newtonville, Newton Center, Newton Corner, and West Newton. And now we have an MU4 district at 4.5 by right and special permit up to 6. And here are the schematics of what that looks like, the bottom two, but you can also have the BU3 and the BU2, the upper one. And let's just go down to at the library. Let's keep going. Next. So this is additional height can reduce the overall cost of housing, housing units. This is another piece that we need to talk a little bit about, inclusionary zoning ordinance. the MBTA Communities Act has a little bit of a sort of override on this, but at this point, just know that more units, more deed restricted units. And you can see if you go up, then you can put more units on a lot. Comparatively between the two formats here, there's a fourfold increase. So overall, this is next is the summary slide about what's allowed in each of the districts, going from right to left, the small, tier C, the middle, tier B, and then the last is the largest MU4 as tier A. And you can see the increase in FAR, and then you can also see the number of stories. And this is the next is another good one, because it has it all on one page, you know, in terms of showing the existing allowable floor heights number, and then also the footprint, and then the FAR values. Okay, by right, this is all by right numbers. Okay, and this is another schematic with more specifics in it to review at your pleasure. So let's go into lot configuration. All right, so they removed the minimum lot size. This is another sort of grouping, you know, in terms of, we're going to talk about the zoning proposal 4 and 5. The first one, the number 4 was eliminate, this is actually number 5, remove minimum lot size. Peter can substantiate what I'm just about to say, but they're saying that half of the lots within the BU1 and the BU2 are under 10,000 square feet. But as I interpret and understand it, if you have a building on the lot, you have a pre-existing right to demo and then rebuild.
Right.
All right. So this 10,000. Right. Okay. All right. But what they're also saying for Trio in Newtonville, they had to aggregate the lots in order to create the building that they wanted. So stop. So the other thing that they, if for the lot configuration proposals, was to eliminate the lot area per unit minimums. So in the current proposal, it's being eliminated. What it's saying is that by doing so, you will have the ability to put more units into the structure. Okay. And this is the next, the lot area per unit is one of the multiple existing standards that control density. Floor area ratio, the FAR that we talked about, is another density control. However, these two density controls are not linked, which leads to a disconnect between the overall size of a building and the number of units that are contained within. And that's an important concept to hold on to. Okay, so the next process is the review process. We have by right with site review and special permits. Okay, so what's changing, next slide, is that up to a half acre in any of these proposed zoning districts, it's by right. If the lot size is between a half acre and 3/4 of an acre, then it's by right with site plan review by the planning board, the planning and development board. And if it's over 3/4 of an acre, it's a special permit by the city council. Okay, and then finally, incorporating strong design standards within the ordinance. So this is important because design standards can help establish clear and consistent criteria applied if they are applied consistently. They utilize a common vocabulary of terms and concepts through diagrams, charts and images, and they provide practical guidance with clear expectations for property owners, designers, and community members. Okay, and then the next piece is showing examples. This is a regulation that the ground floor commercial space must provide high transparency, but the standard is that 60%, it has to have a minimum of 60% transparency required. And here's some Watertown examples. You can make the design standards consider sustainable design, a facade treatment. It can next, it's the public, you can control public realm and open space or parking and access. Okay, and then lastly, let's talk about lower parking requirements. They are our local laws that require private businesses and residents to provide at least a certain number of off-street parking spaces. It's based on the individual use. And then an example is new apartments. You can read. Require a number of spots for residents and news businesses for their expected customers and employees. So now if we go to the next slide, you can see what's being proposed. It's asking for half for residential. It's going from 2 to 1. For office space, it's controlled by the amount of square footage. It's being dropped by 2/3. And then commercial, ground floor, it's 1 per 3,000 square feet or 1 for 3 employees. For a restaurant, it's 1 for 3 seats. This is our current, and then plus 1 per 3 employees. And now they are exempting it. And it's to be determined for other commercial. And this is the first time we're seeing, more specification about the use and what's required in terms of parking requirements. So this is something you can review later. And then the concern, next slide, is, where is everybody going to park? So you either have people that want to be car free or car light. And that's apparently being seen in recent Newtonville developments in Austin Street and Trio. And then will there be enough parking for visitors to the village centers, which can potentially negatively impact businesses? And then, okay, you can see that there are possibly other transportation options. Depending on where we get with the commuter rail and the G. Okay, another really important point to consider is that your parking space can become living space. And with the accessory dwelling unit conversation right now, this is something to think about. Okay. All right, so where are these new rules going to apply? Here we go with where, next slide. This is where the planning book defined our village centers. And if you look at this next slide, this one's a good one to look at. It's the identified village centers that are seriously being considered. And if you can see on my right column is the number of lots that are within each of these village centers.
Lots being considered what?
For the designation of the village center. This is a delineation of the number of lots that when you have your planning book defined boundaries, village center boundaries, these are the number of lots.
This is from the handbook?
This is from the GIS. This is from
So,
Doug
Brenda,
Greenfield.
go to the previous slide.
Yep.
Just for, sorry, anyway.
So,
I
yeah,
think-
these,
no,
if you,
previous, yeah,
this
I
one.
think if you count up those lots.
yeah, I didn't
It
do
adds
the
up to-
count. Yeah, correct. I didn't do this count. This was given to me by Doug Greenfield. So it's the breakdown in that previous slide, this slide, of how many lots are in each of those defined pattern book boundaries.
So this is pattern book
Correct.
information.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So
But
does
this is-
pattern book mean commercial and residential? Do they count?
They're just literally counting the number of lots within the defined boundaries of the village
Right,
center.
but to those lots, it's land lots, boundaries around each particular land lot. So it
Yeah,
could
so
be
when you draw that,
A house or.
correct, it could be
commercial,
residential or,
very
yes,
nice.
correct. Correct. So these numbers on the next slide are literally those numbers, those number of lots. Okay, and it's a good,
Like the state's MBTA thing? No, it's
Yeah,
not.
I am-
Okay,
I am.
so,
this is literally just a physical number of the number of lots.
okay,
that
did we
are-
figure out why Chestnut Hill wasn't in there? Did we?
Okay, let's keep.
Oh.
Okay, all right, so here we go with what they're doing. This is up at the library. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it literally looks the same. You know, between the orange is what's existing and this is what's being proposed in terms of the blue. So it hasn't bled out into the community. You know, it's literally staying within the framework of those defined boundaries, the village center boundaries. And if you flip through the next one, it's the same for each one. So we haven't had any presentation to date of anything out of the framework of what's been defined by the pattern book. Okay. This is from the library. This is what's up at the library right now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about mapping in the Mbt Communities Act. This is actually something that zoning and planning is going to consider this coming week. So I'm just going to do a high fly on this because I sort of feel as if we have information yet to gain from this process from the city. But it's actually something, if you read this, it was part of the economic development bill that was signed by Governor Baker in 2021. And it's a requirement to provide the zoning for a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre. And that designation must not have any age restriction. It needs to be suitable for families, and it needs to be within a half mile of the T or the commuter rail. And we are considered the highest. If you go to the next line, we're considered a rapid transit community. So we need to provide the zoning, if you look at the second column, for 8,330 units. Each of the zoning districts needs to have a minimum land area of 50 acres. And 90% of those designated areas need to be within a half mile of the transit loci. Sure, I'm gonna go, all right. So, it's likely that village center zoning alone will not be enough to fully comply with the MBTA zoning requirements. However, it's an important piece of the puzzle as many village centers are located near transit. So as I had said, it's going to be discussed this coming Wednesday night on the 28th. And so we have more to learn. These are terms that define and so we'll do a deeper dive on this, but these are some terms that the Mbt Communities Act uses, so it's good to know these. So I'm going to pass it to Jennifer.
I'm over here.
Okay.
I knew I was coming.
Okay.
So everyone turn down your speakers now. So we've just discussed a lot of information. It's very heavily dense, and your brain is probably full of zoning information as we are sitting here. And now what to do with that? The next step in this process is to utilize the feedback tool. Your feedback is essential, whether you agree with what's going on and you agree with these patterns and ideas, or whether you disagree. It's really important for you all to go and fill out the feedback tool and give the city councilors enough information so that they can go ahead and make the votes in ZAP and city council. Next. So as Anil said before, phase one was 2021, coming out of COVID. I don't know who remembers take place. And now, next, we are in phase two, as we said, which is getting this information into the feedback tool. Next. So what does this tool look like? I don't know if everyone has gotten a chance to look at the tool. Basically, it is a survey that is done on multiple pages. This is taken from the PDF that they gave to us. It's available on your computer or via your smartphone or tablet. My recommendation is not to take it on a smartphone. I tried to take it on a smartphone and it's a lot of scrolling. I would go with a tablet or computer if you have the chance. But basically, there are lists of questions in each portion of it. And for this one is actually, I think it's the one about why you attend or why you go to village centers. So in that case, it has a bunch of pictures for you to pick and reasons you go. And go to the next, please. And then again, we talk about the topics that Raina mentioned going forward. I'm missing one. I don't know which one I'm missing. But basically the zoning districts, where they're located, the heights, the
I can't hear anything.
each of the questions, each of the four areas has a topic, which is whatever the top is, the definition of what it is, which is what we went over today.
Jennifer, they're saying your audio is cutting in and out. Try to be even closer.
I can't be any louder. We're gonna blast everybody here. Is that better? Maybe I'm just.
No.
moving.
It's more that just stops and gets totally quiet, and then you talk again.
It just say it was unstable. and we'll
That was
discover
just.
it.
Ah, so sorry about the audio being unstable. I'll try not to move. The next part is the image description, where it has the images that Raina had on the screen, which kind of defines what it visualizes the definition that was just given. Then there's a section that has the counselors' arguments for and against. And this is where I think it was from the straw votes and ZAP, and it will tell you what the counselors were thinking, what the votes were in that straw vote, and why each counselor felt, or why the groups of counselors felt that this was good or bad. So the pros and cons from the counselors themselves. Then there is the actual question that you're going to answer, which is like a box that you would check. And it's a temperature scale. So it's, I highly disagree, I kind of disagree, I'm neutral, I totally agree, that kind of thing. And then you just fill out the one you are. And then there's the big part in the end, which some people might just scroll over because they just want to get through the survey. But there is a box that is a free response section. And this is really where you can make your opinions known about what they're proposing. Because sometimes when you check the box of I highly disagree, or I totally agree, it doesn't convey why you're agreeing or disagreeing. So it's really helpful to go to that box and really put in the exact reasons of why you think this is a good idea or a bad idea. Next. So as we said, I mean, we just gave a presentation here, but if you want to go see it in person, the library has an exhibit. If you walk in the front doors, they have these little signs here on the left. And you can follow them all the way through the library to the second floor. You get off the second floor, you see this sign, it points you straight, and you look down the long hallway, and there it is. So it's literally, you get off the stairs and go straight. Next. And inside that room, you'll see, you walk into the room and you go straight and around the corner in a clockwise, in a clockwise manner. And it will go through all the things that Raina just basically gave you information on. And again, you'll see like on the sides here, I can't point for everyone, but if you see that little cutout on that first poster, thank you. That is where the council's opinions are. And so you'll see the whole piece of the information and the council's opinions kind of stuck on the side there, you can see.
Actually, two of them are incorrect. They mixed them up.
Oh, did they?
And they haven't corrected it yet.
Oh,
I
no.
did point that out.
Well, hopefully they can get there.
Figure out what it is.
And so it takes up the entire room. As you come into the first part, you do see on the upper side, like there's a map. And if you go to the next, you'll see this is the map they have up. Again, it shows the pattern book definitions of the village centers. And these are the people who have gone to see it. It's not really clear whether you're supposed to put your little pin on where you live or what village center you identify with, but everything seems to be clustered in the village center. So I think that's what people are interpreting to do. We have a lot of representation there from the village centers that are represented here. So that's good. And then if you go to the exhibit and you don't really understand what's happening and you want someone to help you walk through it, they've actually provided docents that will come, that are stationed at the library from the planning department, and they will help walk you through all of the pieces of the exhibit. The next one coming up is on Wednesday, the 28th at 9 to 11 in the morning. They do have one evening slot left for people who work, and that's on the 11th of October. So we only have a couple more times for the docents before next. Oops. Oh, there we go. Before October 16th, 2022, which is a very important date. That is the last day that you can fill out the survey. So we're halfway through the process. We only have a couple weeks left, but you have to remember October 16th, because that is the day that they're going to turn off the survey tool or start collecting information. Next. Then what happens? So after they collect all this information, I think Anil said they're going to vote. It says the end of 2022. All of the, a few of the area councils have asked to extend the survey tool date because it's a lot of information that we've been trying to put out. And so hopefully that'll get pushed out a little more to give us more information and more time to push it out to you and gather surveys. But right now, that's what they have on the board. Next. So again, if you want to have your input heard, you need to fill out the survey tool. There is a tiny URL here. Basically, that's just it takes the long the long website and puts it down into something that's digestible that you can remember and take home. But it's tinyurl.com and then zoning feedback tool, all one word. I also, for people who are sitting here, there's a QR code in the back that they are giving away at the library and that they have posted all over the library. And you'll see it right there. That will allow you to go in and take the survey. Next. Now, if you have any other questions about zoning that we have not covered today, or you think that there's something that you want to really address with others, all the questions should go to zoningredesign@newtonma.gov. You can also contact your city councilors. If you want to talk to all of your city councils at the same time, it's just citycouncil@newtonma.gov. And if you want to talk to just the zoning and planning city councilors, you would talk to the clerk, Jacqueline Norton, writing an email, and she'll pass it on to all the members of ZAP. So I think that's the last slide. So thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for us about zoning or the process or the survey or anything? Oh, we got lots of questions.
I just will. Okay.
Way back when the bill was making.
Oh.
Hold on, I'll look at you. We also have people waiting to talk.
This,
Go
okay,
back and forth.
this is just to get a precision about something. And Neil, when you were talking about the history, you mentioned that there was housing that was done actually to what's it called? To de-densify. Is that what you said?
Right.
What do you mean by that?
To reduce the density of.
Louder.
Yeah, by that I meant just to reduce the density of the residential areas.
So spread it out a
Spread it out,
little bit
make it-
more.
Yeah,
Right.
if you see in 1953, we have new lot and old lot standards. And in 1953, the new lot standards had bigger side setbacks, bigger rear setbacks, minimum lot requirement. So they're making it more suburban.
This is
I think Allison Anderson wants to weigh in on what we were just talking
Okay,
about.
all right, and then also we can identify the person that just spoke. You should, people
Okay.
should identify themselves, you know, so that we get.
Alice, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, the old lot, new lot thing is important. The 1953 zoning applies to the places that had not been developed already by 1953. So it was an attempt to make sure that we had an enormous, I know it's hard for people to believe, an enormous amount of farmland in Newton still after World War II, mostly on the south side, but not only. And the new 1953 larger minimum lot size, larger setbacks and so forth, all applied to the new lots being carved out of those farms. It didn't apply retroactively to the places that already had houses on them. They were exempted. They were also exempted in 1943. The things that had already existed in 1943 were exempted from the new 1943 standards. So we have this sort of archaeological system in our zoning, which is kind of hard to grasp sometimes. Thanks.
Alice, can I follow up with that because of your expertise? This is Chris Pitts again. Does that mean that there was a sort of a thought at sort of preservation and maybe, you know, keeping land and sort of following up on the Garden City idea? Is that was
I
pervasive?
wouldn't put it that way. I would say it was a deliberate attempt to make sure that as you were trying to spread things out going forward, you weren't accidentally making the lots people already owned with houses on them undevelopable and less valuable. So it's also fits into the whole idea of non-conformity. So it's a little tricky to say so much of Newton is non-conforming. It just means that we deliberately exempted a lot of our originally developed areas focused on our train stations and transit lines. We exempted those from the new, more sort of car-oriented zoning after World War II. So I don't think it was about preserving open space. I think it was about making sure that if you owned a house built in 1898 on a lot that was now too small compared to the 1953 suburban standards, you still had a developable lot and your property was still valuable and you could still sell it.
Oh, that's interesting. That probably applies to like most of them.
Chris, I can't hear you, what you're saying back to me.
Chris was just saying that probably most of Woburn would be applied under the older standards.
Yeah, you'd have to look. One of the things that makes old lots and new lots difficult is whether you have an old lot zoning, zoning requirements or new one depends on not when the house was built, but when the lot was created.
Right.
And you can't go into the assessor's database and look up when your lot was created. You have to go look at, God save you, the registry of deeds. So it is very complicated and it takes a lot of work to figure this stuff out.
But Alice, Alice, thank you so much for adding that information. But the other piece of this is that, most of the lots are considered valid non-conforming lots. In terms of that pre-1953. And, if you have that and you have a building on it, it is developable and it is buildable, right?
And we said that specifically in our zoning code in 1943 and in 1940, whenever it was in 1953. Although that's also a general standard in the state zoning statute now.
Right.
So it's sort of doubly insured.
Yeah.
If I can't see whether there's a queue of questions, but at some point I'd like to close.
I think we're going to go to one question from the room and then we'll go back to Zoom, but I'll call you, Joanna.
Thank you.
Also, if you're on Zoom, then you should raise your hand ideally. Anyway, we're going to go to the room. You have to come closer.
And you can state your name too.
Yeah.
For the record. Isabel Oliver.
And my question has to do with the definition of transparency. I had the same question at the library, and you showed the transparency requirements for the commercial use first floor. What does that mean?
That's the window, basically how much of the window, so you can see into the store. The transparency, it's the window.
Okay, and does that mean the window has to stay open? I don't get it.
No.
Just the window has to exist.
Yeah, instead of having just a brick wall, which is not pedestrian friendly, you'd like to have windows.
Thank you. Online.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna go to online hands. Let's go to, I think Peter Bruce was first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm concerned about how the MBTA goals from the Housing Choice Act are getting combined into this when we haven't even decided that we want to go along with that. At least as far as I know, there's been no vote to do that. And it seems like that's where this global goal of 8,330 extra units from the zoning comes from. And the important thing about that is that that does not consider how much we've built since about 2015, which is about 1,000 units. And then also the fact that we've got around 2,500 additional units in the pipeline. So overall, if, you know, it may be that this will never all be built out, but that's like a goal or a goal of roughly 12,000 new units. As you saw in 1953, we had 82,000 population. Our population's grown by about 7,000 since then. But you know, this is anticipating a huge and, in my opinion, very unrealistic growth in population. And it just seems like the whole thing is geared for a whole lot more density. And if you read Mayor Fuller's update on the census and how much we grew between 2010 and 2020, we grew at about half the rate of the surrounding communities in the overall Boston area. So it seems to me like there are a lot of goals or planted axioms that are going into this that don't really make sense and that need debate and should be voted on. And one other thing is Washington Street. Anil did not mention that between 2018 and 2021, what the zoning and planning department was, or what the planning department was mostly concerned with, and also ZAP, was doing the Washington Street Vision Plan and the Needham Street Vision Plans. Those went into the comprehensive plan, and they in Newtonville Center limit the height to 4 stories, whereas it looks like we could get up to 6.5 stories by right. So it seems like there's just too much of a rush to do too much and not enough consideration of even some of the visioning that we've done and the plans that we've got, and that a lot needs to be voted on there, and that a lot of planted axioms and packed assumptions ought to be pulled out of this thing and debated in front of a broader public than they're going to get just visiting the library. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go. I don't know if no one wants to respond from in here.
Oh, actually, I will.
Okay.
The zoning, I don't really
Just say your name first. Actually.
Oh, my name is Paula Kelleher from Upper Falls. And the zoning to me is a little bit, you can make rules and bylaws and everything, but when it comes down to it, if you look at the Northland development, it is 9 times more dense than the surrounding neighborhood. The square foot of the complex is almost 3 times larger than the Chestnut Hill Mall. Now, in the old zoning, you had that a project won't adversely affect the neighborhood. Now, a complex of this size being built on a street that can't handle the existing traffic, you can't tell me that it's not going to adversely affect the neighborhood. And I think our goals seem to be somewhere else other than the residents who live, work, and use the streets. I just don't get it. And it's not a transit-friendly plan or whatever the name for it, is because both of the transportation that is available to those people that are going to live in the Northland development are slightly over a mile away.
Okay, I think we'll go to an online person at this point. Joanna.
Hi, I guess what I liked about what I heard is it sounds like Newton is trying to move towards encouraging less car use, more units near transportation. I don't understand the nitty-gritty of what's going on with the MBTA, whether we're gonna get any improvements on that or is it going in the other direction. But I think you know, that Newton encouraging walking, biking, and public transportation use is all to the good for the environment, for the beauty, and for people meeting one another, and for being a really good community where people talk to one another. So something that struck me as maybe not a great thing is taking away the minimum size of a unit, because what that means is that the poor, you know, the poor and the extremely poor in Newton are gonna be living in tiny, tiny units, and I don't know, I didn't maybe grab all the information that was being presented, but like, I'm not clear on like, if new developments are being built that are supposed to at least partly be for you know, affordable and for, you know, the people who live well below the poverty line. If we're building places like that and people are living in small units, I really think there should be a priority on having communal spaces in those buildings, because I just know I'm sort of a mental health professional, have been off and on for years, and I just think that a lot of our mental health problems are coming from people living in an isolated way, and I think there really needs to be thought that goes into you know, for people that are isolated in the community, creating living spaces where people are going to gather at the mailboxes, people are going to gather in a community room, people are going to see one another, and you know, and it makes the whole, I believe it makes the whole community safer when you you know, intentionally create ways that people are going to be involved with one another. Thanks.
Thank you. Pam is going to say something.
Hi, this is Pam Wright, city councilor, and I'm on ZAP, so I know all this quite well. I like the idea of communal space, but that's up to the developer. That's something we can't regulate, especially by right. So all this that we're talking about is by right. So we may say, okay, you can only have this much footprint and this much far and this much setback, and you can do whatever you want inside there. Now, on the special permit, this is something that might be able to be brought in and discussed with the developer, but by right, there's nothing we can do, you know, determining what's in the inside. Now, one of the things, I was probably one of the only ones that did not vote for a minimum for zero size limits. Right now, I think 1,000 is too big, and I'd like to see that reduced. And I don't know what the right number is. Is it 500 or 600? But when you have none, wonder if micro apartments become a big thing for 2 years. So all the developments going in might be only 300 square foot apartments. Who knows? We can't predict the future. I don't expect it, but you just don't know. So I think having a minimum, and again, as an average would be a good idea, but most of the rest of the people on ZAP, the counselors, they want zero minimum, and just let the developer decide what they want to build.
How is it that Newton has no influence over the developers? I think that's very dangerous to allow the developers to make units as small as they want to, and then provide no common space.
Newton has some influence over the developers when you go by special permit, and pretty much most everything that's goes by special permit gets built, but there's a lot of give and take. It takes a while, you change, you know, things change up, go back and forth. When you do by right, it's a lot of these houses that you're seeing being built throughout the city, most of them are by right. And as long as they, you know, follow the setback and FAR, they can put up anything they want for the most part.
So you're going to create ghettos, basically. All poor people are going to be in these set aside complexes, and in a very, very rich community that's going to create friction and a lot of, it's not going to be good for the community.
Well, the thing is, the flip side of it, the developers want to make money. So they are, you know, the market rate, the more expensive ones, they got to have so many affordable units, but they're trying to make the most money they can.
Well, this is not, I mean, why do we have a council if we just feel like people should be allowed to make unlimited amounts of money? Why do we exist as a government organization? I mean, I am not an official part of this council, but isn't that the purpose of government, is to set limits on capitalism run wild?
So yeah, the city gets to set general standards, and how the developers work within those standards is up to the developer. And under a capitalist system, they're trying to maximize the profit. The minimum lot area per unit doesn't mean there isn't a minimum size requirement for individual apartments. That's set by the building code rather than the zoning code. So there is that there in existence. It's just not a zoning matter. So you,
I think this is Jeremy, by the way. I think that what was being said is that if you drop, or if you eliminate the lot area per unit standard, then a building will have as many units as possible and therefore smaller units or the smallest possible units. Which may or may not be, I think that's what was being suggested. I'm not sure if that's actually what would happen.
not probably what what we're seeing in development in Newton is a lot of larger units. Yeah. We actually in Newton has had a development which was very favorably reviewed by many of the neighborhood because it had smaller units of the 1,000 square foot size. But if those units didn't get below like 900 square feet.
There was a proposal, this is Pam again, there was a proposal, it hasn't gone forward over by in Thompsonville of micro units, apartments, 300 and 400 square feet apartments, and they have yet to submit their permit, so I don't know where that is at this point, but there was some interest in that, but I agree is that generally the developers will produce bigger units at this time, but we don't know what the future is going to be, you know, and what people want may be different.
Oh, come over here
I will.
and say your name.
Oh, Mary Lee Belleville. And who was just speaking in the,
That was Joanna Mann.
Joanna?
Yeah.
So Joanna, what I was hearing you say was concern about the city not exercising control and allowing developers to do whatever they want. But the direction that we're going is to allow a lot more by right, which means that the city will not have the control that they have today.
Can I ask why we're going in that direction?
Well, that's a good question.
So right now, anything 3 units or more and most commercial is by special permit right now. 1 and 2 family, if you're not meeting the setback or something like that, they'll go for a special permit. But most bigger projects are by special permit. The whole thing behind the Mbt Communities, there's other towns where they're not getting building. Developers aren't coming in and they're complaining about the special permits. And so the state said, well, let's take away that and let build by right, just like we have with 1 and 2 family units, and it'll bring more developers in. Now, Newton is a little bit different. From 2020 to now, we have approved 2,300 units. And we have in the pipeline that are going to come into special permit another 1,200. And this is an 11% increase of our housing since 2020. This is not built, but this is going through the special permit. It could take 5-7 years before it actually gets built. So I think Newton's doing the work to increase our housing. And with special permits, we have a little bit more control over what's being built versus doing it by right.
Okay, we have 2 people in the room. Is it on topic to what we're talking about?
Yep.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, I'm Bill Resner, Newton Highlands. The question, I'm following up on Peter Bruce's comment about the possibility of the city rejecting the MBTA proposal. There is a possibility of that happening, I understand. And at the cost of a couple $1 million a year, which is maybe the price of a unit or 2 of construction, new housing construction.
People behind you can't really hear you.
Can't still repeat it.
I can repeat it. Mr. Resner was talking about when he was asserting that the Mbt Communities Act is optional for the city, which it may or may not be. I'm not sure myself. And Lisa Monahan is saying it's not, and Dan Powdermaker is saying it's not.
So,
Yeah. No, it,
so can I,
hang on.
can I answer that?
Pam is going to weigh in.
So, correct, some counselors do believe that we have to do it. Other counselors who are lawyers saying that we don't have to do it. The question, so not sure which way it's gonna go. The question is, how much do we lose right now over the last 5 years? There's certain money that we received. It was about averages $460,000 a year over the last 5 years, that average that we would lose if we would not follow the MBTA community laws. So that hasn't been fully decided. It hasn't really been fully discussed in the city council, but there are counselors on both sides.
Dan, you can come over.
So I would like to make.
Come closer.
I'll make a comment on the state law, just because this has been discussed, but I also have some thoughts that I think could help the city of Newton and all of the residents, not just the 40 or 50 people that are here on a Saturday afternoon, weigh in on this village center proposal, which is what, you know, the exhibit's about and all that. I'm quite confident in what I say here. Massachusetts passed a law for the MBTA communities. They specified penalties. The discussion about whether Newton needs to obey the law or not, that has been, some counselors have said this, you know, publicly. Oh, the penalties are not that great, is what's implied. It's only a few $1 million. That is a logic that we can all, you know, say is valid or invalid. There is a state law that is responding to what is a crisis in many people's minds in the Massachusetts area. And we see it in traffic. We see it in the housing prices going through the roof. We see it in developers building bigger and bigger units because, you know, there's plenty of people that want McMansions. And the question of with all of these policies, Mbt Communities, the zoning reform that is, you know, wrestled with, and it is divisive and there's trade-offs made, is what do we want the next 50 or 100 years of our community and of our state to be? And there's lots of trade-offs. Now so that's the MBTA community piece. I came here today because I'm very interested in what the neighborhood councils are doing to reach beyond the very, very small group number of people that are engaged through the neighborhood councils with this process. And I have some ideas I'm happy to share, but one that I'm very pleased that you are encouraging people to go to the library and look at the debate that's played out over a good long period of time and is on display. And there are some errors because it is complicated, but there's a lot of good information there, pros and cons for the various proposals, and weigh in. There's only 50 of us here though, and I bet most of us have already weighed in. How are you going to reach out to the many thousands of residents that are in these area councils? It's not posted on your Facebook pages. It's not on the mailing lists, at least Newton, I'm on 2 of them.
It's on the Newton Highlands.
That there's a library exhibit?
Oh, this meeting was on the.
This meeting is, but why not? Yes, time out. Let me finish. I'm proposing, you don't need to do it. You haven't. Since September 1st, there has been an exhibit at the library. It's running to October 16th. The councils have focused on not enough time. What I am suggesting, at least you consider, and I did it yesterday on the very small Google group, 408 member Google group, Newton Highlands Committee. It's got a lot of non-Newton Highlands people in there. I posted it. And I did it a bit out of frustration, but encourage everybody to go and say yes, no on these issues. That's how we have a democracy. Otherwise, we're talking to ourselves.
So if I could weigh in.
They can't hear you.
Yeah, all right, yes. I actually, you should sign up for our newsletter, the Woburn Area Council, because very early on, we send out our email and we actually posted the flyer that the city had produced for the Community Engagement Network. So every time we send out an email, we're actually asking people to go to the library. Now, with regard to the Mbt Communities Act, I think that this coming Wednesday, we'll have a little more discussion within the Zoning and Planning Committee meeting, so that then we will get the planning department's perspective on the law. And I think that, there are quite a few lawyers that are sort of weighing the regulatory authority of the DHCD. So it is in the quadrant, I would suggest that it's still being legally deliberated. So I don't, you have your perspective and your opinion, and you are welcome to it as I am, but I'm also listening to quite a few lawyers on the subject. So I think of it as being the kind of discussion that it's still in process.
Can I speak to Dan's?
One last comment.
Robert, you're next.
I'm not on your newsletter, and I'm not really looking to be on more newsletters, but I will sign up for it. I did look at your website and it's not there. I looked at I think it was Newtonville's Facebook page. You posted 4, and I'm on your newsletter. 4 times the Village Day was promoted within a short period of time. 0 in the newsletters. I live in the Highlands. I redeveloped a house, and I think that Councilor Lucas was on the Historic Commission, voted for it, commended me. 35 page vote. 2 families in a 7,000 square foot house that 1 man lived in and died in. So I feel good that at least that property was not torn down, it was preserved and all. And that's how I got in your newsletter. But I've not seen anything from you about this exhibit. So
We're supposed to have a meeting this week about it, but something happened. We had to transfer it to next week. I wanted to introduce it to my people before I said, go ahead and fill this out without telling them what they were filling out. So I'm having a truncated version of what we're doing here with my people. And then we're going to start going it out. I just don't feel like
I'm not trying to attack anybody. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to attack anybody. I'm just advocating for, if you have the ability to reach the citizens of your areas beyond the group, the citizens, and there's thousands and thousands of them, as you know, why not say, go to the library and you can look at what the city is doing. You don't just say good, bad, or anything.
Suggest that the planning department has not fulfilled its requirement to reach out to the community. Why aren't we seeing something in our utility bills? A flyer within each utility bill notifying the community at large that there is a exhibit. I've asked it numerous times through my engagement that the community.
Okay, I think the point's been made.
I just wanted to say something, but I wear a lot of different hats when I produce a lot of cultural events in Newton. I produce the Festival of the Arts. But the task that you're talking about reaching those 90,000 residents of Newton is there. I mean, the most penetration that anybody has right now is the mayor's newsletter. She has something like 60,000 or something. Who opens those? Who reads all the way down? We don't know. But there's half at least maybe 10 listservs and Google groups all across different villages. There are cultural newsletters. There are a variety of things. But the area council has about 1,000. The Waban Improvement Society, which I'm the president, we have another 1,000. It probably overlaps a lot. The open rate is about half of that. So, reaching these 5,000, 6,000 people in Waban, for instance, for us, it's just really difficult. So the task that you're asking us to do, I can assure you probably every area council here has done it 3 times over. But it's a very difficult thing to reach all the Newton residents, but we try every day, I'm telling you.
You're misinterpreting my point. I'll say this, and I'm going to sit down. The topic is, how do you reach people? It is very, very hard.
Yeah.
No question. How do people open it up? I'm just encouraging you folks to use the means you have.
Yeah.
Some councils, the Highlands doesn't have its own listserv. It's not belong to the committee.
Right, sure. But they use it as access to.
It's got 408 people on it, 409 because I signed up.
Yeah, we're gonna move on. Hang on, do you have something quick?
No,
I'll go to Robert in a second. You just have something quick.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Farrell. Couple of quick issues. I agree with Dan a lot. We should all just continue to promote this issue around the city. One of the places would be with the new Fig City News, which is trying to expand around the city. There's another newspaper, electronic newspaper, I don't know what it is, but anyhow, there are other options, and I agree with Dan, we just need to continue to try to do it. Secondly, one of the things that really concerns me in all of this process is the design review standards does nothing about preserving buildings in the village centers. Not as far as I can tell. And it's pretty clear that preservation is not a top issue in this city. And it needs to be certainly within the design center. In the design review process, it seems to be, or the standards, I'm curious to know whether each village will be able to participate and say, we're concerned about this building. It might be privately owned, but we're concerned about it, and how do we protect it? Thank you very much.
All right, we do have 4 people on Zoom who are waiting very patiently, so I'm going to go to them. And by the way, speaking was Stephen Farrell in the room. Now we're going to go to Robert Fizek.
Yeah, hi, Robert Fizek here, Newton Highlands. I'm on the Newton Highlands Area Council. And well, more directly to Dan's point, without trying to load up the Highlands volunteers with the task of reaching out to each individual village, I see this process as being extremely deficient from the city side on making particular presentations, both at the library and we're reaching out to each village through us, if that would be helpful, in order to get that engagement on these proposed changes and the engagement that was supposed to happen, I suppose, with their official engagement process, but that really didn't work. So I think we need a more serious effort, and that's going to take some time from the planning, zoning department, and ZAP and their consultants to come out to each individual village and actually present what these proposed changes mean, particularly to that particular village, in a way that people can understand on the ground and actually includes the context that they're familiar with and care about.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stay with the virtual hands because again, a lot of people are waiting. So next is Diane Parente.
Actually, I have 2 things to say. Going back to what Joanna Mann said about mental health, what are, if any, the repercussions of a family of 4 living in an 1,100 square foot apartment where they have the 2 bedrooms and a living room, dining room, kitchen area, and everyone has to either be in one of those 2 spaces so no one ever gets to be alone, or even a couple living in a 500 or 600 square foot apartment, which is what we're seeing in all the new development in Newton. My other question is, I noticed that Chestnut Hill is not mentioned as a village. I know a lot of it is a historic district, but is any of it not a historic district, and why isn't it included?
I mean, I can give as far as like the part of Chestnut Hill that's on Route 9, like the square and the street, those were recently rezoned to BU4, and they're kind of their own animal. But as far as closer to the T station, this historic district, I mean, I think if I was running the city, I would include it in, if nothing gets built, nothing gets built, but at least nothing should be excluded from this process. I would say same with Oak Hill Park. I mean, right now that village center is not very active, but I don't see why, if we're going to go through this whole process, we should include everything. But this actually is Jeremy talking. I don't know if people on Zoom realize that, but this is Jeremy.
So does anyone know for sure why they aren't included?
People in the room are shaking their heads about when. Okay. Yeah, we'll go to
I can answer that some, but they're
actually,
considered.
hang on, Dan. Yeah, Kathy, go ahead.
Chestnut Hill, that area along Route 9, Needham Street and Washington Street are all considered, like, they call them the corridors. So they're like looking at the zoning for those differently, and the pattern book looked at those differently than the villages. So they've gone back to the pattern book and using that for what the villages are. I agree that they should be included too, but.
Yeah, hang
So
on.
does that mean they won't be included in any of this zoning?
So we're
I can't hear it all.
No sound.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. So this is something I'll bring up in ZAP. And also what's missing is the Beeline stop. There's a little village center there, which part of it's in Newton, part of it is in Boston, but there's a lot of land there and that's not included, which I think is an oversight.
Yep.
Yeah.
Come over here, Mary Lee.
Mary Lee Belleville again, picking up on what Robert was saying. One of the gaps, I think, as far as the outreach effort right now is to the business community. So they have not been engaged at all. And, you know, Village Center is going to impact them probably more than anyone. This week, I walked into 3 stores in Newton Center where I knew that the person there was the owner of the business. None of them knew anything about what was going on at all. So I know that the planning department's been doing some focus groups, like folks 15 to 24 and renters. I really think they need to do a focus group with businesses. And I really like the idea of doing village by village meetings, and then the business owners could actually double up and attend those meetings.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna stay with the Zoom hands because there's still a lot of them. Kathy, do something quick or?
No, I haven't had a chance to talk yet.
Okay, then it is your turn. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just a couple of things that have kind of come up. The whole idea about, I don't like the word by rights. It makes it sound that they're just going to do whatever they want. But I see this process that they're trying to do now, the city's trying to do now, as the way to control what gets developed. And by right means you have to follow all the rules and the standards that get set. And so Newton is trying to set those new rules and new standards now. And then if you want something bigger, then you have to go to special permit. And the whole process of special permits now is like very risky for small developers. So it's very hard for them to come in. It's hard for nonprofit developers to come in. So I just would like much clearer rules about what can be done and what needs something special, because right now the current rules like don't even allow residential in villages. So anytime anybody wants to put anything in with housing in the village, they have to go for actually a variance or something. And then the other thing is that I think Mary Lee just asked about the businesses. I think the planning is working with the Economic Development Commission and holding focus groups with them to reach out to business.
Why is it difficult for small builders to come in?
Because the special permit process really takes a long time to go through. Would cost a lot of money in the waiting and in lawyers. But if you could, just like we see in all the residential area, all those big McMansions and stuff are getting built by right, because that's what the zoning says. And that all those developers are not going to try for a special permit because that's too risky to do anything else. And so this is setting these new rules and what we want for the villages.
Chris?
We're just wondering, how do you know that? Are you a developer or are you representing developers doing that? Because I see developments going up all over the place in my neighborhood. I see them, it just doesn't seem like they have the same problem that you're talking about. So I wondered if you had what kind of resource material you have to back up what you're saying.
That just is what I've heard. Mostly it tends to be more larger developers that are doing the development. Right. There are some smaller ones doing smaller projects, but they're not that small.
So this is Pam Wright, and I'm going through and collecting the data of special permits and things like that. And there's a lot of 3 and 4 and 5 and 12 units that are going through and being approved. And from going to land use meetings, pretty much most of the things that go through land use does get approved. May change a little bit. And for instance, the Mr. Sushi project, and I was talking to a neighbor down there, and it's 12 condos, 3 bedrooms, 2 affordable, great project. The neighborhood didn't like it at all. Going through the special permit, all the neighbors except for one, you can't please everyone, are now very, very happy with the project. And you know what? The project is still 12 units, 3 bedrooms, condos, 2 affordable. What did they get with the special permit? They wanted it off the residential street a little bit farther back. They wanted to chase it a little bit of the front, so it wasn't so just a big wall type of thing. Just little things that the developer did do, and in going through the special permit and talking to the neighborhood. And now they have a project that's going to go in their neighborhood, and almost all the neighbors are very happy with it. And that's what the special permit does for the neighborhood. And again, from the data that I've been collecting, you know, almost all special permits get approved. Now, it does take time, and it depends on the developer, and it depends on the lawyer. It might take longer than it should. There's give and take back and forth. And the other thing with the special permit, the city gets to have a lot of other things that isn't by right, like all electric, like solar on the roof, passive house standards or LEED certified, chargers for the cars, you know, things like that, which by right, we would not get any of those. And then also, especially with the bigger projects, they negotiate with the developers that some money might be put into a nearby park or some street configurations, things like that, which again, with the smaller by right projects, we would not get any of that. Thank you.
We'll go to Lisa, but you have to, hang on, first Raina.
I just want to share my screen.
And-
So
and
that,
talk in the microphone.
yeah, so that, you know, just to put if everybody can see this, these are the transit hubs that were identified. The lighter color is the half-mile radius, and the darker color is the quarter-mile radius. And what Pam was specifically identifying was the Boston College hub for the T, and then down below here is the Chestnut Hill radius of their walk shed. So these are the identified transit hubs for Newton.
Yeah, we'll go to Lisa Monahan.
Whoa.
I didn't realize. I thought it was elastic. Okay. I just wanted to add a couple of comments. I go to many of the land use meetings, and I'm a practicing architect. The special permit process is incredibly cumbersome and incredibly expensive for small developers. It's I think it's just not fair to characterize it as something, you know, really good for the neighborhood. In the proposal that the planning department has put forth, and the Mbt Communities law allows for design review. And so there will be plenty of opportunity for talking to developers about solar, about electric, and there are also major state initiatives which are going to make sure that some of those things get implemented. I wanted to make a comment about I think it was Stephen Farrell. I don't know if I have his name right, but he mentioned design review standards and design guidelines. I think the city is putting forth that they want to propose incorporating them for village center design. They don't exist right now. And certainly treatment of historic properties can be addressed in those. It's I think what's put forth is a concept, not, written, the written body of the proposal. So anyway. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna stick with the virtual hands again. I think next should be Ben Mankey.
Close enough.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Quickly to the earlier comment, for whatever it's worth, Dan Powdermaker, that I joined this meeting after about 20 minutes because I saw your post on the Newton Highlands area listserv. I may come to regret it because it probably means that Robert Physick is going to make another run at me to join the Newton Highlands group. But that's what I have to live with. That's the consequences of my own decisions. I'll have to live with that. I have what may be, in the grand scheme of things, a boring first order question about the proposal. I'm seeing in the recommendation to allow for reasonably taller buildings, the concept that in small village centers, you'd have 2.5 stories by right, medium village centers, 3.5, large village centers up to 4.5. And I understand the argument that the half story is virtuous, that's the assertion, because it allows for a diversity of roof lines, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess my question, which again, may be boring and kind of detail oriented, is if a half roof line or if a half story is virtuous in the by right designations, why is there not a half story in the special permit designations? Why doesn't the special permit allow for, say, 4.5 stories or 3.5 stories, 5.5 stories, 6.5 stories? Like, if it's good for the goose, why isn't it good for the gander? If it's bad for the goose, why isn't it bad for the gander? I'm just like that inconsistency was just, I found curious. And I thought I'd ask in case there's a good reason that a bear of little brain like me is not cottoning onto.
Okay, this is Pam Wright again. So I don't have a complete answer to that, why we don't have half stories on the special permit. But when we had UTL, which is our consultant on all this and presenting, and one of the questions I asked about the half stories, because I'd like to see pitched roofs, but I said, are we going to see pitched roofs with the half story? He said, probably not. It's cheaper and easier to do a flat roof than it is a pitched roof. So my proposal is to give them a half story, they're going to have to do a pitch roof and not a flat. And some of these, it showed 7 feet, 11 feet, whatever, what the ZAP was saying is about a 6-foot setback. And that's it with the flat roof. So even though it says a half story and shows the nice pictures of pitched roofs, in reality, almost all of them are going to be flat, at least according to UTL and what I would expect too, because it's cheaper and easier.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that as well as an architect? The way that ZAP is using the half story description geometry in this proposal is radically different than what is in the zoning, is in the ordinance right now, used mostly for residential purposes. There's an extra 2-foot margin that's added to the floor to floor before you start counting the slope, and it's not clear that there'll be any slope. There's no slope actually noted to designate, where that half story, would have to fall for a slope, in a slope roof. And it gets very complicated very quickly, because then you start looking at, then you get the dormers that want to go into the sloped roof. And all of that gets fairly complicated very quickly. And that's why even when we're all looking at the stuff that's proposed in West Newton behind the Santander Bank, it looks like they tried to make it look like a half story, but if you look at it, it's really a full story.
So with apologies, just to repeat what I think I heard and then tell me if I've got this wrong. I'm not hearing that there's any sort of regulatory or legislative constraint that would keep the special permit designation from also being a half story if you thought that was a good idea, if a half story was a good idea, and there's nothing that would sort of force us to do a special permit on a full story, I think is what I heard.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking the question.
Ben, I think the idea is that the whole special permit process is discretionary. So if you make the maximum height a full story, maybe the developer can design it in a good way, or maybe they won't, and then it goes down to a half story. I think that's that's how I interpreted that proposal anyway.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yep, no worries. We're gonna stay with virtual hands again. Hang on 1 second. Yeah. Sorry, 1 second. We're good? Yeah, okay. Dennis, you're next.
Hi, my name is Dennis Risky, and I'm an architect, and I work for developers. I've done multiple projects in Cambridge, Boston, Brookline, a few in Newton. I've actually been successful in getting special permits in Newton, and I have to agree with Pam Wright. The whole process of getting a special permit is very difficult and needs to be changed. But I would also highly recommend that you keep the special permit in some form throughout the city. I've been advocating for 4 years, because I've been working with the planning department, for robust design review, affordable housing, elder residences and village centers, and what I call land value capture, which is actually a planning concept developed by the Lincoln Land Institute in Cambridge. And as part of land value capture, I'm a little worried that the city in their proposed zoning reform is basically going to give away the farm. Basically, they're giving away by up zoning village centers. You're basically, without a special permit, in many cases, you're basically giving developers a free shot at value that's created without the city being able to capture any of that value. So I think in many ways that is doing a disservice not only to the city, but to those of us who live in the city. And I would also say that I'm an architect in Ward 5, and I talk to Deb Crosley on a regular basis. I was the developer for the Stone Institute in Newton Upper Falls more than a few years ago. I did get that approved, but it was a difficult process. And again, you can make the special permit stay for this increase in zoning, but just make it simpler. I've also talked to Deb about the fact that her proposal, or the ZAP proposal, to reduce the parking is consistent in many ways with what I see in Boston, Cambridge, and Brookline, but I think it's going a little too far. And while this is a good starting point, I've also tell you that I've volunteered to the planning department to actually host 2 sessions as a facilitator. And I've actually talked to the 5 or 6, 7 business owners in Newton Highlands and sort of alerted them to what's been going on. And they've basically given me a very simple set of 5 or 6 points that I've actually passed back to the planning department already. So it is going on, but it is a process. So
Dennis, can you just very quickly explain land value capture? People are asking about it in the chat.
Okay, land value capture is a planning tool that is actually used quite extensively in South America and in Central America and in Asia. So it's actually used here in a different form than what can be done in South America and in Asia. So land value capture basically says land is only, land can't be created. Basically, it has value. And if you give away the increase by increasing the FAR, the developer is actually the gainer of that. And what most of the towns and cities do, including Boston and Brookline and Cambridge, is basically they require a special permit so that they can do exactly what Pam Wright said, which was to leverage, as part of the process, leverage and either changes to the project as originally proposed, or make them pay for, like Austin Street, paid for a lot of the village center improvements. But that was built into the proposal along with the affordable housing that was required. That was also, I thought, a very good example of land value capture, because the city was was in complete control of that process because they were dealing with a city-owned parking lot. So that is a good example of land value capture. If you just look at Austin Street in Newtonville, I think that is a good example. The bad example was basically the proposal that got approved on Walnut Street in Newton Highlands, where basically the planning, the city council just gave the developer everything, and it's a bad project. It's a bad project on many levels that I want to go into now, but.
Okay, thanks,
It's a
Dennis.
bad example of land value capture. I don't know if I explained it properly, but I
Okay.
tried.
We're gonna go to Carolyn Gabay, who's been waiting very patiently for like the entire meeting.
Well, it's my role to be patient. I'm a member of the Newtonville Area Council, so I think that it's been very helpful to hear all of the comments. And I chatted in this comment, but since only some people are on the chat, about 18 or so, I wanted to articulate it for the benefit of the people in the live audience and for the recording. And one of the things I have not seen, and in fact, the planning department has declined, saying they have neither the time nor the money to commit to, is a 3D model of what the full build out that would be permitted by right and with special permits would look like in real life, so that those of us who are not architects or land professionals can appreciate what a fully built out village center would look like under these proposals. I did see in the library exhibit some limited examples of illustrations of what the size of a building would be if built out to the 4 or 4.5 stories. But in those illustrations, the rest of the block stepped down from the size of the full allowable height, and made the village center appear to be something other than what I suspect developers who are interested in capturing the maximum profit would actually build out, which is they would cascade down the block at the full allowable by right and or special permit add-on, so that in reality, what we'll see over a period of time, unless we control it, is a full build out. And I think about Newtonville Center, because that's my residence and jurisdiction, which is charted here to be a highly developed village center with 4 to 4.5 stories. Newtonville Center, Walnut Street is a pretty narrow street. When you're on that street, you don't feel like you're in the middle of Newton Center. And I'm not casting stones at Newton Center or trying to play one village center off of another. I'm just saying it's a very different geography. So if you have 4 to 4.5 story buildings, and I think of the 4.5 story buildings as 5 stories, lining both sides of the street, we're going to have a canyon up and down Walnut Street. For a sort of non-scientific frame of reference, think about both sides of that street, which is currently 1 story with the exception of the Masonic building, the Bank of America building, lined both sides of the street with the Trio building, one after another, or a little less than what it is currently, but Masonic buildings almost up and down that street. I don't think it's going to be pleasant. I think it's going to be overpopulated, over-trafficked, and it's going to be shadowed and become icy in the winter, particularly now that we've had the road diet in Walnut Street. It's kind of hard to pull in and out of the limited number of parking spaces. And so I don't know how the businesses are going to be able to get consumers to come in and take advantage of them, because it'll make the location very hard to access unless you're a lot more physically fit than I and can bicycle everywhere, or you don't live on top of a hill, or you don't live somewhere where the T doesn't bring you directly to that place. So I would like our planning department either to provide us with a 3D example of what they're talking about doing in our village centers, or at the very least, an illustration that shows the full build out, not a fanciful rendition that makes it appear like developers aren't going to build what they're allowed to build, and shows us an illustration, as is at the library, of stepping down buildings, because I don't believe that's what's going to happen. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thanks, Caroline. I just want to point out that we blew past 4 o'clock. So I don't know if the hosts have anything to say or people were trying to leave.
We're trying to leave. Nobody's booting you out of here.
Okay, well, I know we have more hands from in the room, so I just don't know if there's some closing remarks that need to be made for people who do want to leave. If not, we'll go to Lisa. Or you have something quick?
You know, for people who have to leave, you know, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Don't pull.
I won't. For people who have to leave, thank you for coming. We really appreciate your attendance and your comments and your questions. We hope to have this recording available, and we will send it out to our respective mailing lists so that people can get a sense of what we talked about if they missed it due to the holiday. So thank you, but you can keep going.
Yeah, we are going to keep going because there's definitely people. Okay, Chris, we'll go to Chris quickly.
So we haven't touched on this yet, but perhaps, you know, maybe it's just me and you can help me understand, but I watched a video from Deb Crossley that she did at the library. And it's linked on when you go to the city site to fill out this thing. So and it was like sort of her explanation of what it is. One of the things that she said, and like I said, maybe I'm just not comprehending Deb on this. But what I came away with, there was an implication that the zoning reform would have some influence on the business mix that would take place in village centers. And that was the first that I'd ever heard that some part of the zoning would have an influence. In other words, how do we keep from having 10 banks in a village center? How do we make sure there's a good business mix? And she seemed to imply there was something in the zoning that would influence that. And I just thought, can somebody enlighten me about that?
Yeah, well, we'll go to Pam actually.
So she has mentioned it, but we have not gone into any details on what that means and how we would do that. But she has brought that up once or twice.
I mean, I would assume it's probably something to do with parking and to do with floor to ceiling heights, but I don't know either. I think Lisa Monahan was next.
I'll explain it.
I just wanted to make a counter to the cavernous sounding village corridors. One of the not the very last speaker, but somebody mentioned how Newtonville could be turned into Newtonville, Walnut Street could be, just lined with Masonic temples. And I believe it was Alice Ingerson came up with this concept that, if we're to comply with the MBTA communities law, Newton has to plan, allow for 8,330 units of housing not currently in the pipeline. Excuse me?
8,000.
Oh, 8,330. Sorry, did I say it? Right. And one way to think of that is that, and certainly some of it needs to be by law close to the village centers. If it's not, it's either going to be up in the village centers, you're going to take care of those units in the village centers with height, or alternatively, those units will be spread out into the surrounding areas. So I think when people talk about sort of the gloom and doom of proposed height in village centers, we should really be thinking about this holistically and complying with the law. It's either going to be up, some height in the village centers, which will be, good for business as well as, transport, et cetera. Or it's going to be spread out into the residential areas beyond. Thank you.
I'd like to just address a little bit of that. So we're going to have a meeting on Wednesday with this is Pam Wright, MBTA community laws, and we being ZAP were asked if we had any questions, which I sent like 6 or 7 pages, but I show examples and things like that in my questions. I think it was only 13 questions on it. One of the things in the MBTA communities, it says it has to have a density of 15 units per acre. And this really needs to be addressed, I think, in the village centers. 15 units per acre average. That includes your roads, your parks, your churches, places where you can't build on. So in the gist, what's his name? Doug. So Doug did he works for Newton with the mapping, and he took a quick look at a couple of different villages, and he was just taking out the roads and sidewalks. And so in West Newton, which I'm by West Newton Village, 40% of the land is not buildable. So that 15 units per acre is actually 25 units per acre. And then my question was, well, they list a few things, but not examples. What specifically will be excluded? So is that 30 units per acre? And, you know, if it's like 30 units an acre, even 25, for the MBTA communities, you got to be within a half mile. And so buildable lots, the 25 units per acre is per buildable lot, or 30, that will require some height. I don't think you can do it on, you know, just townhouses, but I don't know for sure. Someone could lay it out. Maybe if it's a whole bunch of row houses without backyards, maybe that would suffice. But there's more details in there that we need to delve in on the MBTA communities. And, you know, and spreading it out, you know, they only allow a half a mile from the village center, and 10% of it can be outside the village center. So I'm hoping then, you know, Needham Street would be counted. Now, the MBTA communities, you always have to remember, it's what it's zoned for, not what's on the ground. So if you have on one lot 60 units, but it's zoned by right 40 units, you only count 40. Or if you got 20 units on that lot, but it's zoned for 40, you get to count for 40. So it's what it's zoned for, not what's built there. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to a virtual hand, and next is Diane.
I just wanted to second what I think Carolyn said about seeing a 3D diagram or a 3D model of the village centers. I've heard many people say they'd like to see that, and they'd like to see it to scale with the by right and the special permit heights illustrated very clearly, so people can see what it really is going to look like, and with flat roofs, because that is most likely what will be built. Is there any way to request this of the city, or is this all a done deal?
This is Pam again. I will request that, and I think it'll be part of Wednesday's meeting. Doesn't mean they'll do it, but I will request it.
Thank you.
Robert.
Yeah, I think, you know, the more you dig into this, the more you realize that there's a lot of incomplete thinking about this whole housing issue. My own opinion on the MBTA Community Act legislation was, it was poorly conceived, poorly thought out. It's driven by a certain sort of pro-growth ideology that frankly no one's done a reality check on. The projections for housing needed, and the legislation frankly didn't give us anything to work with as far as affordability. It's really a trickle down economics applied to you know, just keep building housing and somehow it's going to get cheaper. Whereas we all see in reality around us, and particularly in Newton, a high value built out near suburb of a city, it ain't going to happen. So any thoughts about major affordability and anything below high upper middle class is just a fantasy. So I think that's going to become more and more clear as people keep looking at it. I know the other metropolitan area communities are also looking at this going, what are you talking about? Here's our conditions. Here's what you're telling us we need to do. And this doesn't make any sense. And I gotta go back to I know at the very beginning, preservation was on the original list of 7 items, I believe, that people wanted. They wanted the characteristics of their villages maintained. And Stephen Farrell made the point again, there is nothing. There's been there's zero thought in this whole process to what those things in the village are that we want to maintain, specific structures, specific buildings. What are the protections? How do these new standards for the floor-to-floor heights relate to existing floor-to-floor heights? How's that going to be controlled?
We're going to wrap up pretty soon.
Sorry,
but I appreciate
I
what
give
you're
this whole
saying.
process a big incomplete
Okay,
at best.
hang on.
Thank
Well, we have one new hand from someone who hasn't spoken at all the entire meeting.
Thank you so much.
But then that's it, because I think we have to leave.
Sorry to
Okay.
go on.
Not Meg. Briefly.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to.
Hang on. Can you say your real name if you can?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm Margaret Ward.
Okay.
Yeah, I went in through Google and I guess that's my handle.
No
that
worries.
comes
No
up,
worries.
Sorry. Anyways, and I live in Newtonville. I just wanted to follow up to a little bit what Robert, the previous speaker, touched upon, is that my understanding is that now it's going on for a couple of years. There's this push, this pro-growth ideology. We have to build, because we need more affordable housing, and there's pressure or expectations coming upon or pushed upon the suburban communities, coming from the what's that group, MAPC, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, etc. I think there was a lot of this movement even pushing towards, which ultimately ended up in the Mbt Communities law that was recently passed, right? I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, I think a lot of this was put in motion before the pandemic, but now what we're seeing in the city of Boston, a lot of companies now are pulling out. They're realizing, hey, we can reduce our real estate footprint, and everyone's going to a work at home model or a hybrid model, and they're reducing, they're pulling out. And we have, to use the term, what do they call it? What's the term? Anyways, real estate that's not being usable, and why are the suburban communities not looking at this and pushing back and say, hey, can Boston now, with all this empty real estate, can Boston now step forward and provide affordable housing and help with this growth, this demand for more affordable housing? I mean, in the city, what you have is you have walkability, you have everything there. Why are we not looking at this? Why isn't there's a bigger effort trying to, if not pushback from the suburban communities saying, hey, can Boston provide a solution to some of this affordable housing issue? Because you got a lot of empty real estate now. I just thought I'd throw that out for what it's worth.
Thank you. I think, we're done? Yeah, I think for those of us who are in the room, we have to leave. So that's the end of the meeting.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Hear you.
And we'll post this meeting as well as the chat so that everybody will have access to this content. All right, everybody, thank you virtually for coming, and thank you for coming to the Walden Library. Goodbye.
Stop the recording.
Yeah.
Say something before you leave.
Oh,
Sure.
You're
You're still recording.